Hello, everyone. Good evening, and a really warm welcome to you all for this, our May session of the Climate Writing Group for the Irish Writers Centre. It's my absolute pleasure to have two incredibly inspiring people with us this evening. We've got Alice Kinsella, who is the author of Milk, amongst other things. We will mostly hopefully be talking about Milk this evening, but an incredible poet, editor, a general kind of all-round good egg in the literary scene in Ireland. Talking of the literary scene in Ireland, down below you'll see we have Cassia Gaydon Gilmartin. I hope I said that
Mhm.
right,
You did.
Cassia,
Thank you, Kerri.
from Channel Literary Journal. It's really lovely to actually have you both here at the same time. Normally, when our kind of NGO representative comes, they just kind of come for their like for the bit at 7:30, or if they're coming at 8. But actually, it feels really nice and um, I don't know, nourishing to have you both on the screen at the same time. We had a kind of a quite a nice little chat in the green room earlier with the wonderful team from the Irish Writers Centre. So thank you for the support with that, with our tech stuff, because if we were left, I can only speak for me, but if it was up to me, it would probably be somewhat chaotic. Anyway, we're going to begin this evening by I'm going to be firstly speaking to Alice, and then I'm going to be speaking to Cassia. The way it's going to look is just as per usual. I'm going to speak to Alice for a few minutes. I'm going to ask her some general questions about her book, her incredible book, which if you haven't read it, I'm going to thoroughly recommend that you do. Um, and I'm going to talk to her about just a few things, kind of just how it relates, in my opinion, to lots of the questions that we look at in this session, how writing or how art in general can kind of bridge the gap between questions or sort of ideas that we have around emergency, the polycrisis, and how we kind of are in the world because of it, how activism looks in the world because of how we write. And then I'm going to move down to Cassia. And it'll be the same setup. I'll kind of ask you some questions, and ask you how you work, what you do at Channel, why you're doing it. And then also in both sessions, we're going to have room for this incredible audience to kind of pop their questions into the Q&A. And I'll leave about sort of hopefully 10 minutes at the end of each person's session for that. So we are just going to get straight into it. Um, Alice Kinsella is an incredible writer. I could list all of her accolades, but actually, what I would really like to do is just say that how she writes in the world today is the kind of writing that I'm incredibly drawn to, because it's, Joseph O'Connor says it's her book, Milk, is a radiant, meditative, truly powerful and beautiful book. Mike McCormack says a brilliantly original examination of motherhood. And these are all, Sarah Moore Fitzgerald says, mesmerizing. But actually, really, Alice, I think that what you do for me in your work is you actually are able to hold these ideas of kind of global anxiety, sort of parental anxiety, worry, concern, a fear of helplessness, and really examine it, like really take it into the light and kind of tease it out. And in doing that, as you've done in Milk, I feel like I feel less scared as a writer, as a mother, as someone who's kind of trying to stand up for our world. And I just want to know how you do it. That's my first question.
Um, how to make people less scared.
Yeah.
Um, I think that when I was writing Milk, and what happened was I had a baby, but I had a very traumatic birth, and it was like all of the barriers that I had built up to protect myself from anxiety over the last I was 25 when I had my child, and about 10 years I'd been kind of doing my best to be kind of numb for about 10 years. And so it wasn't that having a child suddenly made me terrified, and it took me ages to work this out, but it was from when I was a child, when I was able to comprehend um global warming as we then kind of knew it as, and various other existential threats. And I think to some extent being human and being conscious comes with that. If you're a creature that is aware of your own constantly impending demise, how can you not be panicky? And all people have to live with that. We all have to learn how to live with it, and it is, I mean, I think it's why we have a lot of literature is from people realizing that they're going to die, and how do you live with that awareness.
Yeah.
um and and then also kind of realizing that that was something that I had brought my child into, that when you have a child, you're like, one day you're going to realize that you're going to die, and you're just going to have to deal with that. And it's
Totally.
huge. It's huge to kind of bring that on onto someone. And
Yeah.
so I had to learn to write my way into uh I had long become okay with my own life, and I was happy. um but I was numb to an extent, because I was keeping all of the scary stuff at bay, um which isn't exactly a way to live, because I was keeping a lot of the good stuff at bay as well.
Yeah.
um and to learn how to put that fear and that shame as well, which is a strange one. But I've gotten asked a lot about being honest in the book, and
Yeah.
not, being afraid of people reading this and people reading that. And I've always kind of thought that, especially growing up in Ireland and all the history of shame and stuff that we have, and that I always felt a lot of shame around my existential anxiety, and just my fear, probably from growing up in a very religious area. So most of my peers didn't openly admit to that kind of
Yeah.
existential anxiety, because it was like, well, heaven, um, and to kind of write towards that shame, because there's so many things that you're going to be judged for, that you're going to be told to
Totally.
feel shame for, that kind of being honest about what I see as a very, very human um way of seeing the world is not something that I feel shame about. Um
Completely.
and, well, like, welcoming, I suppose, readers into that fear, and into acknowledging it, and into putting it there and going, okay, this is the thing we're terrified of. Now what? Rather than just going, no, it's not happening,
Absolutely.
which is
Absolutely.
our historical technique. And but also it's a natural way of doing it. I do
Yeah.
think it is natural for people to just go, no, I can't.
Yeah.
Um, but it's in the
I,
long run, it's not useful.
yeah, it make what you've said makes me think, if I remember, the another Irish poet, Jean Clark, saying that she was convinced that in Ireland, particularly, that religion had had a really big impact on how we responded to
Mm.
the biodiversity emergency, climate emergencies of our time, because we had this inherent, yeah, I can't remember if she discussed shame or not, but she definitely talked about the idea of us sort of thinking that we were in control of the animals and of the trees. And when we look at how Ireland has been for quite a
Mhm.
while, when we look at kind of forestry and things, like, does that feel pertinent for you or real for you?
Yeah, it's something that I get very, very angry about, and have done since I was a child. Um, I'm lifelong vegetarian, and always just had this kind of massive connection with animals, this empathy for animals. But also I'm quite I suppose I'm quite a literal person, and I'm quite a logical person. And so even as a child, I never bought into well, the food chain, the people are at the top thing. Therefore, people get to kill everything.
Yeah,
Because, what if, I was like, well, what if something else was bigger than us? Would that then make it right for us to be hurt? And I was never able to separate. I've never been able to separate kind of animal suffering from human suffering.
yeah,
Um, I can block it out. I can wear leather boots. I can eat cheese, but I know that it's wrong.
mhm.
Um, and so, when I'm doing my best, I don't to do those things. But and because I've been talking, I have a small child, and having a small child is like having a tiny philosopher. Um, so there's been lots of questions around. meat. Why don't we eat it? How come some people eat it? Does that make them bad? Does that make them good? And it's very, or there's like, if the people that we love eat meat are, and but they're not bad, then why can't we eat meat? And you're
Oh,
like,
I know.
um, but the way I had always thought of it was that if, as a person that was able to comprehend suffering and pain and wouldn't want it done to me, I mean, it's very Jesus, really. It's very biblical. It's like, yeah, do not eat the sheep if you do not want the sheep to eat you. Um,
So, for those people who haven't read Milk it's often you're often asked to explore this book from a kind of a maternal viewpoint,
mm,
from talking about matrescence, motherhood, parenting, but and it is that, and it's really incredibly done in that way. But it's never separate from the crises that
mm,
we're living through. In fact, if anything, it feels almost that you wouldn't have written this book were it not for that. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit to, yeah, the impetus between becoming a parent and then stepping into, I think, which is one of the ultimate forms of activism, which is kind of writing a book that people can kind of hear their story presented. And could you talk to that a little bit?
mm. I had I'm going back to childhood a lot today for some reason.
Mhm.
But when what I had, again, I'd always been interested in conservation, environmentalism. I was a big nature person. I wanted to study zoology, and I go into wanted to go into climate conservation. And didn't, for various self-involved reasons to do with poetry. And and I just couldn't cope with it. I couldn't cope with the kind of regime, and the kind of regime, that's not right, routine, sorry, routine, and the being in a lab and all that stuff. So I couldn't do it. And so I had intended to write in whatever way I could towards environmentalism. And then I just had a few years in Dublin with like a lot of gin and poets, and like
Yeah.
being young. And it was like, after when I started writing Milk, it was like I just woken up and went, how did I become a poet? What was that about? um, what are you writing about? Why are you writing? What are you doing? And everything. And I think it was just part of the numbing. It was part of the numbing
Yeah.
that had occurred. And so the urgency came back, the urgency to actually be saying something important, um, to be contributing any tiny bit that I could.
Totally.
Um, and for a while, the idea of it being art felt very hopeless. But I'm much happier with my decision now, in that we know that the science is there. They know
Totally.
how to fix it. It's got nothing to do with the science. It's to
Yeah.
do with politics. Um,
Exactly.
and the effect of the arts on public collective action has been proven to be huge. So one small drop in the ocean, and that's the
Absolutely.
plan.
I am going to invite people again just to remind them to get their questions, any questions that they might have for Alice, in and around these things, or any other questions that you have, pop them in the Q&A. I am going to invite you to read now, Alice, and then I've got like one more question for you before the others come in, or maybe two. But I would love you to read just a little short excerpt from Milk would be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll read some sections from within a larger section.
Thanks, Alice.
Um, as the baby nurses, my abdomen cramps, my body trying to find its way back to its old self. I am dotted with lilac, stock green mustard. Only now, weeks from the last jab, are the bruises yellowing to heal. Recovery is taking longer than I thought it would. It hurts to walk or lie flat. I sit on the sofa or in the rocker, curled like an animal shielding her underbelly. Even when he's asleep, the baby prefers to be in my arms. I scroll on my phone. I can't read books, partly because one hand is preoccupied holding an infant, partly because sleep deprivation and pain are affecting my ability to focus. I scroll on my phone. I'm not looking for anything in particular, though any information is easy to find now with the internet in my pocket. The percent of the world's rainforests destroyed in my lifetime, one click. Number of extinct species this century, a quick scroll. The number of years humanity has left, up for debate. It's not difficult to find information like this, but a certain amount of cognitive distance is needed to move through waking hours, controlling what gets through the filters, the carefully constructed walls. I carry the baby up the stairs. Each step makes me gasp. Even a weight as light as him uses muscles that would rather forget themselves. I try to stay immobile, distract myself with the screen. On my phone, I look at maps. I look at a map of where we live. I look at a map of where I grew up. I look at a map of where I went to college. The dates on these maps aren't the date I'm living, but dates 30, 50, 80 years in the future. By then, so much of the country is underwater that it no longer looks like our country. Where we live now has disappeared completely. The baby sleeps against my chest. It is the only place he will still. I sit. When I'm not looking at him or out the window, I look at my phone. I read an article about bees. It's about more than bees. It's about their decline, their role in humanity's survival, how we are failing them. The photograph at the top of the web page is a plain of soil, dry and cracked, infertile. In my chair, the rocking chair by the window, growing grimy with habit. The cars chug by at all hours. They cough and splutter fumes into the air. Our house has good ventilation. When we leave the windows open, black flecks settle on the inside wall, the sill, the curtains. The fan system whirs.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you read that section. It's the part where I have the most post-it notes in the whole book.
It's quite long, so
I
I was
love
like, okay,
it.
just stop here.
It's such a pivotal section. And thank you so much for reading it so powerfully. I wanted to say that how I kind of first properly encountered your work was actually when you were editing. So you edited an absolutely incredible collection, quite unlike anything that I'd seen before or since. And I was wondering if you would like to maybe talk a little bit about Empty House, what it
Yeah,
was, where it came from, where people can get it now, because I think it's a really incredible collection. So please talk a wee bit to that.
yeah. Empty House. Empty House didn't get the kind of outing that it deserved, I think, because the pandemic hit, and the pandemic hit, and I was in the kind of early stages of motherhood. Um, I'd I think I don't remember. I I brought it to the press. I wanted to edit this anthology on climate writing. It was that sort of I was kind of working in that direction of writing about doing something worthwhile, writing about the things that I cared about. And this was in 2017, 2018. I remember it was slightly before Greta Thunberg's kind of came into the news and stuff. So it's like it was still on the
Yeah.
edge of people's awareness, but the kind of big push hadn't really started. I think she's done such phenomenal things. Um, and I wanted to bring my thinking with it was that at the time it seemed like it was something that only really scientists and people that were already involved in conservation were thinking about. And I believed and still do believe that the arts has an important role to play.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to get writers thinking about it. I wanted to just like open some conversations, some small conversations, uh, uh, through the literary world with it. And so I brought it to their press, and they were wonderful. And I was quite new. I was like 24 or 25 or something.
Yeah.
So they suggested I get a more experienced editor to do it alongside with me. And I got the wonderful Nessa O'Mahony. Um, and so we asked a lot of writers to contribute, and we we structured it thematically. It's spring, summer, autumn, winter, or does it start with summer? I can't remember. Or it starts with autumn. I can't remember the order that it starts in, but there's a kind of there's where we are, where we hope to be, where we could
Yeah.
be. No, that was it. It's where we are, where we could be,
Yeah.
where we're afraid we'll be, and where we hope to be. So it ends on hope. Um, and so there's these dystopian pieces. There's these kind of more mournful looking at um the climate as it is now. And then there's we the book closes on your piece,
Yeah.
the goldfinch, the hopeful goldfinch, and we got an artist, Pat Gavin, she's actually a tattoo artist, but she's a good
Mm.
friend of mine, and will she's patient when she gets a wacky email from me being like, could you do a drawing? And she did this garden shed, and there's these underwater
Yeah.
this garden shed throughout the seasons, and it's just incredible. It's just a really beautiful book, and the pieces that are in it are just they're just wonderful. We just asked people to respond, gave them kind of a list of words to respond to. um I do hope to kind of bring it out again and get
I
a
was
reading
just
of
going
something. Yeah.
I was
It
just
would be
gonna
nice.
I was just gonna say it's a very beautiful book, and I feel like it does deserve a big party.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Five
I'll email there and be like, let's have a
5 year
party.
anniversary or something. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I would thoroughly recommend, as Alice said, it's at the Dura Press, Empty House. You can buy it directly from Dura.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, so that's kind of where I first encountered you. And I want quickly, before I'm going to ask people again, if you have any questions at all, that's fine. If not, I have lots, so don't worry. But just to open it up to you all, if you've got any questions for Alice, please pop them in the Q&A. So I wondered, a little birdie, a very tiny little droll, and a little wren told me that something new was coming from you
Mm.
soon
Yes.
that might be relevant for our group. And I wondered if you could give us any little hints about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a couple of new things in the works. One is kind of under the umbrella of the other.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in cross media collaboration, in cross discipline collaboration, and working with my apologies, working with other artists. Um, and I'm out in the west of Ireland, and that I grew up in the west of Ireland. And I publishing Milk. I published Milk with a publisher in the UK, and it was great. But I also kind of I'm very aware of that, like the industry feels like it is all just happening in London or in Dublin, and I was getting
Absolutely.
really tired, and I wanted to put my money where my mouth is, I suppose, and I want to do more in the West because there's so much happening in the West. There's so many artists happening in the West. So there is a production collective called Cuivnu Creative, um, which is a collective of artists working on work based in heritage and conservation. So looking at how
Amazing.
we can protect our past to preserve our future is the working
Beautiful.
tagline.
It sounds
Um,
gorgeous.
and
So,
our first project is going to be a multimedia project about the Irish whaling stations in North
wow.
Mayo. So there will be more about that on socials in the next kind of week
Yeah,
or
so
so.
everyone needs to flock to Alice's Instagram and follow her. I am going to ask the two questions that we have in the Q&A, and then I have my final question that I ask all my guests for you. Okay, this is from Alison Dornberg. Did you feel you needed distance from your experience of motherhood, and as a reflection on the climate crisis before you wrote Milk? Did you need distance away from your motherhood experience
Uh,
and your
mm,
kind of and your climate stuff before you wrote Milk?
no, and this is going to really annoy a lot of this would annoy me if I was struggling to write, which I did struggle to write, with small baby, but no, Milk was written in real time.
Yeah.
Milk was written in real time because I was panicky, and I had this real. There was there's a lot of intersecting issues there, but there was I hadn't really built that much of a career, so that was definitely an aspect of it. I was only 25, and um which is not young to be a mother, I was told by a nurse who laughed at me. But is I was like, yes, it is. But career-wise, I was like, oh my God, I have to be still writing. I can't just take a break to write. If I got pregnant again now, I wouldn't. My computer would be in like the bin for like 2 years. But at the time, I was just like, oh God, I can't let my career go. But there was
Yeah,
also that panic, that overflow, that I needed to get it out. Because if it wasn't out, then it was running around in circles in my head,
I hear
tying my
you.
brain up like a ball of yarn. And that wasn't helpful either. So
Yeah,
it was getting it down and getting it kind of out of my head as well. I also think that distance, we start to trick ourselves because tricking ourselves is the only way that we can function.
yeah,
And tricking ourselves, while very useful, um, is not good for literature. It's not good for writing. So
I
to
hear
get
that.
the honest stuff, the really honest stuff out there, distance would not have helped. Because
It's
if I wrote a book about motherhood and climate now, it would be like there's
filtered.
also a lot of the really crazy stuff like the breast milk soap and stuff that if I'd have had enough distance, I would not have.
Yeah.
And I still see ads for that on Instagram, by the way. Don't do it. Your baby will smell like cheese. Um, but give your baby a breast milk bath. Um, but yeah, it would have been too faux academic and too journalistic, which is not the voice that I can write in.
Yeah,
It needed to be
thank
in
you.
the fire.
Perfect. Vicky Pinkerton has asked, what advice would you give to anyone who is nervous about putting their work out there?
Like it depends on the reason that you're nervous, I suppose. If it depends if it's a shame thing or if it's a anxiety thing. I think as long as you're being honest with yourself in your work and you can stand by your work, then you have nothing to be nervous about because some people will like it, some people won't. And that's kind of that. I
Yeah.
mean, I have like read my reviews because everyone reads their reviews. And like some of them, like I'm very lucky. I've got lots of really lovely reviews and stuff, but my reader reviews are the ones I'm the most interested in, and the bad ones are the ones I'm the most interested in as well. And like the only one that ever made me go was one that was like, oh, you could have left out this section and this section. And I was like, oh, I could have. Because I was like, okay, that's actually, yeah, that's good. Whereas then the reviews that are like, this should have been a collection of poems. I'm like, this should be you read another book then. It's like to stand over your work and stand over your own voice. And then more practical advice would be get a writers group, share it with people that you're close with first, share it with people that you're only close with professionally, share it first, um, and and kind of judge how you feel about their reactions because it's easy to be like, all stand over your work, and not think about the actual effects of that. But you don't want to send anyone into kind of a bad place either, because it is hard. It is really hard. um but yeah, share with friends and
It's
find
brilliant.
an online writers group so you can share with strangers as well.
That's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant piece of advice. Thank you so much. My final question to you before I let you go, and it's been really gorgeous to listen to you talk about this incredible book and about your work beforehand. I want to ask you, we're living through innumerable crises at the moment, and right now we are observing just heartbreaking, harrowing brutality towards our human kin. And I just want to ask you, in general, what brings you hope?
Hope.
Yeah.
That there are victories, that there are things that are different now. The corncrake and Wales. The Wales is a big one. Um, the book that I'm working on, the poetry book at the moment, which is a collaboration with another writer, is about the whaling stations, the Irish whaling stations, which most people didn't know existed. So I've spent the last year doing like a I can show you what is holding up my laptop right now, which is this size of it. book about men and whales. So the whaling, getting rid of whaling, or at least reducing its impact, was a massive victory. It was a massive victory. Whales were nearly
Yes.
extinct. They were so nearly extinct. The entire global economy revolved around whaling for centuries. And it was a combination of, there was a lot of factors, but the one that I'm kind of hanging on to is um, the arts. There were the arts
Wow.
and public pressure, and public
Wow.
and political pressure did change it. Now there are other factors that aren't quite as hopeful, but it has had an effect. And once you tip public opinion,
Yeah.
um, I saw George Monbiot write about it in The Guardian a few years ago. About there's like a tipping point of public opinion. Like once you get past, I think it's 25%, getting
Yeah.
to
Then you're,
75% is very, very easy.
yeah.
Um, and that it's that we've seen humanity has done awful, terrible things, but it's also been responsible for incredible things.
Yeah.
Um, and there has been huge progress. It's just this idea that it's a constant, you know,
Yeah. It's
that it's not
accumulative
constant
bit by
progress.
bit.
It's not. It's,
Yeah.
we will fall back and go forward and fall back and go forward. And
Yeah.
so yeah, other people. I say this living in a field, like barely tolerating the two people that do live for me, but other people, broadly speaking.
Oh, Alice, they're gorgeous answers. It has been an absolute joy to speak with you, as it always is. And
Thanks.
yeah, hopefully we'll see you at some event somewhere, some hopeful event, at some time soon. You're willing to stay on the call, or if you need to
Well,
go
I'll turn
care
off
for
my
your
camera.
wee one, that'd be gorgeous. Thank you so much,
All right,
Alice, and
thanks, and thank you, everyone.
for these questions as well too. Cassia. It is
Very.
it feels so special. I mean, every set of people that are on feels so special to me, but it feels really special to me from Alice, who's kind of talking of this collaborative sort of coming together of multidisciplinary stuff on the island of Ireland, and kind of the hope that is held by public opinion and the arts to then move to you. And I would just love to welcome you and just say that I've been really, really moved by what Channel are doing. And I wonder, just for anyone who's on the call who doesn't know about Channel, if they've been living under a really beautiful rock for a while, could you maybe tell us who you are, who Channel is, and how it looks right now for you crew?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kerri and Irish Writers Centre, and thank you, Alice. It's been so lovely to hear a little bit about your practice. It's really enriching as an editor and curator of climate writing to listen to you read and talk about what you do. So, Channel was founded in 2019, the year when the global climate strikes really took off. Myself and my co-founding editor made the decision to start it on the day of the first big climate strike that year, so it was really
Wow.
born out of and buoyed up by the energy of that moment. We take our title Channel from the idea of a channel in all uses of the word as always being something that connects. So it's always
Yeah.
a passage through which one thing can flow towards another. And we set it up in the hope that our literary channel puts acts in much the same way as a passage for the circulation of ideas around how we relate to our shared environment. We're in the simplest words a journal of eco-writing, but when given a bit more space to define ourselves, as you're very kindly giving me here, we like to describe ourselves as a journal of wit that serves to foster the connection between human beings and the more than human world. So
Yeah.
even though a lot of what we publish falls outside of quite traditional restrictive definitions of eco writing, we feel that that it's always targeted towards that purpose. It's always by writers who are writing consciously into a shared space of ecological consciousness, and trying to use nature consciously as a creative source, because all writing unconsciously uses nature as a creative source. All human thought and language is founded in relationship with the environment in which we live. But what we're trying to do with Channel is to create a hospitable shared space for people who want to make those unconscious processes conscious, who want to work together to see what words and art might do to spark new thinking about how we can live in the world.
Gorgeous. And what kind of not pushed, but what kind of drew you towards this calling? You know, why you?
Well, it was a matter of what Alice said as well, about trying to make something of that. Those selfish reasons we have, those self-centered reasons why we're not working in conservation instead. I set up Channel as I suppose a way of putting my natural skills and my natural inclinations as a writer and creative in service of the world. It felt like the thing to do with the anxieties I had about the multiple crises we're living in now, and it felt like a way of pulling some community in around myself, around those shared anxieties as well, because we can't live in the climate crisis alone. We can't intend creation the climate crisis alone, and it's eminently reassuring to me and invigorating to me to work with writers who are also muddling their way through it.
Absolutely. And so I wonder if we could talk a little bit about how does the process look? I mean, we've got loads of incredible writers on the call this evening who, if they haven't already sent to you, I guess they maybe will. So how does it look? Sometimes the process behind sending work off can feel very overwhelming. It can feel confusing. Sometimes we feel like, oh, is there a kind of a like unspokenness, like, oh, you have to be established, or you have to have done a master's in something, or how does it work for Channel? How do we send into you? What's the step? What are the steps?
Thanks so much for asking me that, because a big part of how we work is, and how we want to work, a big part of our ethos is around making a lot of that unspoken, trying to talk as much as possible with writers about how we do what we do, and how we promise to work with them, and how we promise to treat their work. So we're open for submissions at the moment for our 11th issue. Before I forget to say that, we're
Amazing.
we're open until the 20th of June. So please do send some work in. If you have anything, we'd love to read it.
Gorgeous.
And you can find guidelines around the practicalities of how to submit to us on our website at channelmed.org. But it's basically just a matter of sending us some work by email. You don't need to write a bit complicated cover letter. You're very welcome to share a few words about yourself and your practice and where your work is coming from. But it's by no means obligatory, and we absolutely don't prioritize work by more established writers over those who are newer. One of the greatest joys to me is discovering people who are perhaps quite early in their career. There's nothing more exciting than getting to publish someone for the first time, especially. It's such a privilege to be granted that trust from a writer who's never been through an editorial process before. So I truly love doing it.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Uh,
Um, and
yes, definitely.
how is the balance within Channel? Is there a lot of is it prose heavy? Is it poetry heavy? Is it sort of mostly fiction, creative non-fiction? What is there a sort of a balance, or how, or is it random each
In the
time?
in the early days, it was very much weighted towards poetry. I think there's
Yeah,
a very strong tradition of nature
yeah,
out and in poetry
absolutely.
that was recognised
Mm.
immediately by writers, whereas we've had to teach our audience what we
Mm.
mean when we say we're looking for nature writing or ether
Oh,
in fiction. We haven't so much had to teach them as they've had to teach us as well. The
wow.
writers submitting work have had
Mm.
to teach us what they can do with their relationships with the modern human world in prose.
Yeah,
And we've ended up getting a wonderful balance of poetry, fiction, and essays in English
amazing.
and in Irish now. As of last year, we've
Oh.
introduced an Irish language editor onto our team, and we're now publishing in both languages.
That was exciting, I think, when that happened, wasn't it? That felt really
That's
special. And
been a wonderful experience for me
yeah,
because I can't read Irish fluently myself. I rely very
yeah,
much
yeah,
on Aisling, our Irish language editor, to work closely with me
yeah.
to help me experience that word, and it's
And
really really enriching to get to see what can be done with the Irish language specifically.
yeah. And
It
would
draws
you,
on the relationship it has as a language, as a form of communication built up in communication with the earth, with this local earth specifically.
absolutely. I wanted to ask you actually how it looked, that decision-making process to introduce work as Gaeilge. How did that happen? Or why did that happen?
Well, we wanted to do it from the beginning. It was able to happen on a practical level because there was an opening for a grant scheme run by Forest Matilda, and we were finally able to get the money for it.
Yeah.
And it also happened because we found the right person to do the work.
Mm,
Aisling Níomh who's also the editor of another wonderful journal called I'm Sure.
mm,
If there's anybody here who hasn't heard of them, do look them up as well. They're a really inspiring publication, working in English, Irish, and other minority languages of Ireland and Britain. And all of Aisling's work as a writer and editor is focused around regional environmentalisms and the potential that language has to inform our thinking around the environment. So when we met her through something else entirely, we just knew it was
yeah.
the right
Click.
time with the right person to finally introduce that element into our practice.
Totally. I just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions at all for Cassia, please just get them into the, I can see questions coming through already, but please just get them into the chat now, would be great. I remember reading the Irish language poet Amarina Huron, who did an introduction for Mancon McGann's recent book, which is kind of words, women's words. And she said something along the lines of that, yeah, the Irish language is really a language of the land. And I
Yeah.
suppose that what you're doing is you're kind of connecting in a different way then with that. Have you noticed since you did that, um, any difference in how, in the kinds of pieces that are coming in at all, or could you speak to that at all?
I think there's a really beautiful local thread coming in the work we publish in English as well as in the Irish language itself
Wow.
since we started introducing Irish language
Wow.
writing into the mix. Issue 10 that we've just released
Mm,
particularly is it includes a lot of work that's really deeply sensitive to the
mm,
ambivalent relationships that people have, and
yeah.
that some Irish people have to their home places. I think the Irish language writing has perhaps opened
Yeah.
up a space for that.
Um, I really do think that there's something very important happening when we clear space for something. In general, I think it sort of does that opening can create ripples even in different ways than we would have been imagining. So it's
Yeah.
beautiful,
Now
beautiful.
I don't even know how many of the writers who submit to us are reading one another, but I have a feeling that
Yes.
some of them are that they're
Yeah.
in
Inter
whether through Channel or through
yeah,
other venues, they're coming into connection with one another as well.
totally.
I can even spy several of our brilliant contributors in the attendee list.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah, Dylan
I
Brennan, Fedas Odan, and Ian Murray. I've seen today, and they'll
gorgeous.
they've all submitted absolutely
Yeah.
gorgeous work to us, and it's brilliant, but also not surprising to find them also together here.
Yeah, I think what you said at the very beginning in your sort of reasoning for setting it up was you spoke to what is always the thing for me, which is community. You said, there was this somewhat selfish notion of you not having to do it on your own, you kind of bringing these people around you, and it really sounds in how you talk about the whole setup that you've done that, and that's gorgeous. I am going to move over to our questions and answers for you, and then I'll come back with another question at least from me. So one second. This is from Aveen Heaney. What advice would you give to someone who is new to writing poetry and would like to submit their work to Channel? Specifically poetry.
Mm. I think first of all, just make sure that it's honest, that it's coming from the heart. Don't worry if it doesn't sound like other poetry that you've read, if it doesn't look on the page like other poetry that you've read. One of the wonderful things about poetry as a form is that it has a very long history of being form bending and of continually reshaping itself. And
That's
I
gorgeous.
suppose also do have a read of what we've published before. You'll get a sense not so much of the concrete parameters of what we do and don't accept, but of voice of how your word might fit into the shared space that is Channel, but also on a rather contradictory note, don't worry too much about what we've published before, because then one of the things that I want Channel to be is continually form bending and continually shifting to draw around new voices.
Absolutely. That's a great answer. Amy, I hope that helped. Erin Evans has said, do you have thoughts about how to balance between writing something honest and meaningful about something as scary as climate crisis without being too hopeless or pessimistic? Um, any things you have noticed in your own work or from writers who have written for the magazine? So I think this is really a question around balance, how to kind of strike the balance so it's open and honest and meaningful, but it's also kind of hopeful as well. It's a question around balance, what you can do in your work.
I think the only answer I can give, and it might not be a pleasant one, is sometimes it has to be pessimistic, sometimes it has to be scary. Let the
Totally.
individual piece of work be what it needs to be, in the knowledge that it'll be placed alongside other voices. So when we're curating an issue of Channel as a whole, we're always thinking about balance. We're always thinking about hope versus hopelessness. We're always thinking about the reader's capacity to read, to stay with us. And we're always thinking about density, different kinds of density of form versus airiness and ease on the page.
Yeah.
So there's a complicated, albeit very much intensive process that goes into making the whole work, and I hope creates a bit of a space in which your work as an individual piece can be as bleak as it needs to be if it needs to be that.
Absolutely, that's a brilliant answer. There's a question here from an anonymous attendee. I would want to set up my poetry channel, but I don't know how to go about it. So I'm not sure if that's a question around kind of setting up your own poetry space online, or maybe setting up your own journal. Maybe we could go for the journal part of it because that's what we're talking about. What are the sort of logistics around setting up a journal? Was it really tricky? Was it really easy? Blah blah blah.
So brilliant to hear, whoever you are, that you're thinking of setting something up. I've been absolutely overawed by the lot of new journals that have sprung up, even in the 5 years since Channel started. It feels like we're no longer one of the hot young things. We're already a journey in the journal space, and that's wonderful.
Old timers.
We are, and there are a lot of complicated logistics, so don't get intimidated early on by the complexities of setting up your website, your marketing systems, your systems of distribution, your typesetting, and so on, and rely on people who are already doing it. There's a brilliant network of journal editors and small press editors out there who love talking to one another. When we at Channel started up, we were very much reliant on Banshee, among others, as mentors, and
Oh, that's
I'm very
gorgeous.
grateful for that. So you're welcome to get in touch with me anytime. We're happy to
Oh,
pay it forward.
that's so generous, Cassia. And I think your whole face lit up when you were talking about the idea of our attendee wanting to set up their own thing. So I think if anything should encourage people, if they're thinking about doing it, it was definitely that response. Because 5 years in, you still look really enamored with what you're doing, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, you can
Okay.
see there's no regrets.
No regrets at all. Um, we have a question here from Thomas Poole. How do you view the importance of myth in literary tradition as it intersects with ecolit and the natural world? That is a gorgeous question.
Beautiful. I love reading about myth. I love, especially as we've introduced the Irish language element into our world. It's been really beautiful to see the way in which Irish mythology and folklore has become part of that. I think myth comes out of a collective consciousness. It comes out of the ether and the spirit and the needs of a time, and that's what makes it so rich. It's it's the vein that we're trying to tap into when we write, when we create stories today. Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah,
it's a huge
absolutely.
inspiration for us.
Great. I want to ask you, so for our audience, we probably could do one more question. If anyone has a burning question that they want to ask, please get it in the chat now. I would love to know what you're reading at the moment, right now, what you last read, and what you're hoping to read after what you're reading.
Oh,
And I want an honest answer. If
let's
it's
see.
if it's chick lit, if it's crime, whatever it is, I would love to know.
Okay, I'm absolutely happy to give an honest answer to that. What I'm currently reading is an Irish translation of The Hobbit. Tolkien has always been a huge inspiration to me in terms of the ways that he describes landscape and the ways that he describes how landscape carries memory. And since I'm working in Irish for the first time this
Wow.
past year, I'm doing my best to learn the language, so I'm revisiting one of my favorite authors
Whoa.
in that language.
Incredible.
See, what did I last read? I have been reading continually a beautiful book by Katie Holton called About Trees, a brilliant together of writing about trees and forests by a collection of voices, a chorus of voices going right back to ancient times, all of it transcribed into Katie's tree font, which is a creation of hers, a font she invented in which each letter is replaced or represented by a native Irish tree species. There's one Irish tree alphabet and one that originated in New York. I think About Trees actually used the original American alphabet, but it's a really beautiful book to dip in and out of when it's in the same way that it's such a joy to dip into myth, to see the ways in which these same images of forests have recurred, have come back up in the collective imagination over
Kerri was
years, and it's a dud read for a busy editor. It's a dud read for someone who doesn't have the time to settle, especially in the middle of a submissions window, into
dipping in and out.
Piece for pleasure.
Kerri has been a guest on our sessions as well, so it was great. And what's your next book that you have lined up?
Let's see, I have so many books lined up. I'm looking forward to reading some Ursula Taylor-Gwynn, another wonderful science fiction writer, but a science fiction writer who was very philosophical in her approach, and I've always been fascinated by the ways in which that genre can be used to open up spaces. Sci-fi writers give themselves permission to look at other ways of being, to open themselves up to how we could be by writing about other worlds. So I'm really excited to see someone who did beautifully.
And then the final question, which I ask all our guests, is, Cassia, what brings you hope?
The continual urge that people have to create, I suppose. It never seems to go away. Another writer I've been reading a lot of is a persecuted Hungarian Jewish writer called Radnoshi, whose work a poet whose work I've been thinking about a lot in the context of today's multiple crises and all the violence going on today. Who wrote his last poems while in a slave labor camp, and while on the march to his death, kept them hidden away in a little notebook in his overcoat, even in his last days. And it's continually inspiring to me that people still feel the need to create, people still feel the urge to create under circumstances like that. There's a generative urge that won't seem to go away, and I'm always seeing it in our writers, and I think no matter how bleak things get, it's not going anywhere.
That's such a gorgeous note for our part of the conversation to end on. And